All right, so we're talking about ignition systems. We got the Kettering ignition system. We were talking about this yesterday, and we were making notes for you. And these are the things that we were saying. The points open and close via a cam driven off the camshaft. Oh, and then I started talking about how engines, four-cylinder engines, four-stroke engines work for those that haven't had engines yet. And I told you that there are 4 strokes and 5 events. So the stroke starts with intake, so we'll get it here. So intake, compression, ignition is not a stroke, power, and exhaust. So the 4 strokes are intake, compression, power, exhaust. The 5 events are intake, compression, ignition, power, exhaust. All right, and we're of course working with the ignition part here, and I don't remember why I had to explain this to you, but I know why. And the thing is, the breaker points, or even a magneto, is reference to the camshaft. So this is the crankshaft over here. This is the camshaft over here. So note that the camshaft goes around twice for every one time the cam goes around. So crank goes around twice for every time the cam goes around once. And that's because the cam is more directly related to the events happening. Follow? What's that?
Say it again.
Okay, the camshaft is really tied more to the events that are happening. So the crankshaft is kind of dumb. It just goes up, goes down. Right? It doesn't know if it's going down because it's on the intake or if it's going down because it's on the power stroke. Doesn't really know. It just goes up, it just goes down. The camshaft over here is kind of the brains of the operation. It's got to think about, should I open up the exhaust or should I open up the intake?
So camshaft has connection to the intake and the
Yes.
exhaust, right?
Now this drawing is not right because it's only got one this is the push rod. But over on this side over here, you would also have a rocker arm, that's the green thing, and you would have a push rod, and this camshaft would really need to be kind of more in the middle to make this work out correctly, which it is. In a normal engine, it's middle, but it makes it kind of difficult to, I shouldn't say it's in the middle. Or this valve is over here on this side behind that one. It's just how they had to draw it. So because the camshaft is the brains of the operation, it has to think about, it doesn't really, but it has to think about whether or not it should be opening up the exhaust or it should be opening up the intake. It's also, according to this drawing, thinking about, with this little lobe right here, should I be opening up the breaker points? See, now if we opened up the breaker points, every time this came to the top, you'd have a spark there, you'd have a spark there. You don't want a spark there, right? That was a dead time. Now you want a spark. Next time it comes up, you don't. All right, so that's why everything's going to be timed off the camshaft. So remember, the crankshaft goes around how many times? Twice to complete the cycle, and the cam only goes around once. So for every time this goes around twice, the cam only goes around one time. So if I asked you a question, let's pretend like there's 6 cylinders, and they're all behind this one. Can't see them. How many times does this crankshaft have to go around to fire all 6 cylinders?
Twice.
Still twice. Okay. How many times does this have to go around to think about and fire all the cylinders? Once. If I had 1,000 cylinders behind there, answer's still the same. This goes around twice, that goes around once. It's just the impulses for all the cylinders become very tightly stacked. Back onto this one. All right. So I think I told you that one because I wanted to tell you that. Points open and close via a cam driven off the camshaft. And that's why it's driven off the cam and not the crankshaft. Where am I here? Let's see. So just to remember that the camshaft, be careful, know what we're talking about. The camshaft turns at 1/2 engine RPM. Engine RPM, or to say at 1/2 crank speed. Crank speed, at crank speed. Oops, I don't want to write that. And is directly I'm going to put in linked, L-I-N, linked. I'm going to put that in quotes, that's like linked, meaning that it's not that I'm trying to say it's physically tied to it. It's more directly associated with what it's doing, which is almost to say the same thing, but it's directly linked to what is happening. What is happening in the cylinders? Where a crank does not. Which is to say, like I was saying, the camshaft is the brains. It knows what's going on. It knows if it's on intake, it knows if it's on exhaust, but the crankshaft does not know, so to speak. It just goes up, it goes down. It could be going up because it's on compression, or it could be going up because it's on exhaust. It's just going up. It's like, I don't know. Camshaft knows. Follow? So back to our ignition system. When the point's open, what happens when the point's open? You tell me now, because we've already talked about it yesterday. The field collapses. Which field?
Magnetic field.
Nope. Be more exact. How many fields do we have in this thing?
Primary field collapses.
How many fields do we have?
Two.
Two. The primary and the
Secondary.
secondary. So when the point's open, the what?
Primary.
Okay. The field in the primary quickly collapses. Oops. QUI. Quickly collapses. So, all right. So I'm going to scroll up just a little bit here. So we've got, I'll go back. So we've got our ignition switch is on. It's just going to stay on. Battery voltage coming through my primary coil, going down through my points, finding its way to ground, and has a circuit coming back through. So we have this series circuit coming through there at this point. And then I said when the camshaft, which is actually turning the distributor up here at the same time, is turning the camshaft, when the breaker point's open, I lose this flow of electricity through the primary. And because we did have flow, we did have a buildup of a magnetic flux lines. When we lose that, the flux lines go away very quickly. And because of this change across the secondary, we have a step-up transformer. So primary quickly collapses. I see this rapid change in the primary field, which is a loss of magnetic field, induces a voltage in the secondary. So this rapid change in the primary where am I? Rapid change in the primary induces a voltage in the secondary. Of 12,000 to 40,000 volts. And if you remember yesterday, I said the actual voltage built up is it's dependent upon the gap that it has to jump. If it's a very small gap and it's only going to take 12,000 volts, it's going to jump the small gap and it's done. If it's a large gap, it's going to build up more potential until it can finally jump the gap. All right, so we have voltage happen in the secondary. Where's it going to go now? All right, the distributor. The voltage, I don't want to say the voltage travels. Well, I wrote here, the voltage travels via large wire to distributor. What's wrong with that statement? Voltage doesn't travel. Voltage doesn't travel. I could say the voltage is built up along but I'll just say voltage amperage. All right, and what's the problem with saying amperage?
There can be voltage.
What's that?
There can be voltage without amperage.
There can be voltage without amperage for sure, but I can't say the voltage travels because it doesn't really travel. I think the best state would be the voltage builds up along, but I want to make sure we get this because the voltage builds up along here. Is there any current flow?
Yes.
Not until there's a spark jump. Not until a spark. Until there's a spark, there's no current. It's just voltage. So I'm going to go with that. The voltage, let's say that. Voltage builds up. I like that. VOLTA. Voltage builds up. Builds up along. That works. Voltage builds up along a large wire to the distributor. To the distributor. To the distributor. So now we're at the distributor. Still don't have any real current flow, but I have the potential to have current flow. Potential to current flow means I've got the ability to have it. All right, the distributor. The distributor is driven off. Is the distributor going to be driven off the crank or the cam? Why the camshaft?
Because it's tied to the ignition of the cylinders, which happens once every 2 rotations of the crank or 1 rotation of the cam.
There you go. Because again, the camshaft's the brains of this operation. It's the one that's got to know when it's time to fire something. Crankshaft is the muscles, right? It's who's my muscles in here?
I was just thinking of Parker.
All right. You want to go with that? So Steve is like the crankshaft. He's the muscles of this operation.
It's not airworthy.
He's for sure not the brain.
I'm the camshaft of the operation. I'm the brains of the operation. It's kind of like Pinky in the brain, right? So Pinky is the camshaft. That doesn't work because of their size difference. But if you get the point. So Stephen, I don't know why you volunteered to be the dumb guy in this operation, but it's a very low horsepower engine, by the way. It's more of a Briggs and Stratton than it is a Pratt and Whitney. So.
I could see that. You see his little baby arms trying to armor?
Distributor. All right, back to the distributor is driven off the camshaft. Distributed off the. Where the heck am I?
We don't even feel like I go hard.
Our distributor is driven off the same shaft the breaker cam is driven off of and points to wire. Okay, so the distributor is off the camshaft and a finger points to the correct, hopefully, spark plug wire.
Is that the technical
I would
nomenclature?
call it electrode.
It's actually called a finger electrode.
Really?
Yeah,
It says like 3 different.
It is now.
It says thumb, finger.
I don't call it the thumb. So what I'm saying here is that there's this distributor electrode finger. There's only one of them. I could be 2. And it is traveling around and timed along with the camshaft. So when these breaker points open, it's going to be aimed right at this one. Then it's going to come around and it's going to aim at this one. And then it's going to aim at this one and that one. And this is going to go around how many times? So if the crankshaft went around twice, how many times did this go around?
Once.
The camshaft goes around once. How many times does this go around? There you go. That's the formula for this and Magneto's. And I would love to ask that question. Crankshaft went around too many times, twice. How many times did the... Of course, the way you ask it is in a 6-cylinder motor where Magneto fires a left-hand rotation Magneto that has a 4-pole rotating magnet. The camshaft went around once. How many times did this go around? Once. Yes, that's exactly how I ask stuff like that. What?
Number 5.
V.
It says the voltage build up a large wire.
The voltage builds up along a large LARG. Wow, I'm trying to shortcut here.
What is it? Is it still large in the secondary?
Yes. So if you actually were to look inside of a car, especially an older style where it actually has a coil that you can see the coil, and out of the top of the coil, dead center, is going to be a very fat wire that's the exact same size as the wires coming out of the distributor cap, going from the coil to the center of the distributor cap. That's the input wire. And yes, that carries all that voltage.
Just out of curiosity, I know in actual automotive coils they have liquid in them, like water or something.
I never cut one open.
Never.
I do know this, transformers, like for SMUD and stuff, they're filled with oil for cooling.
Oh, okay.
Are we gonna learn how to time everything?
Not this one, but those. How you gonna learn how to time that?
Yeah,
to
damn
death.
right you are. Nah, just put it together.
Let me rephrase that.
Next to it.
I'm going to give you the opportunity and expect you to do it, rather than not you learn it is a whole nother thing. You'll learn it. Steven, you still the crankshaft back there?
I'll go ahead and do
You want to be the cam now? All right, you got to be the brains of the
No,
operation.
not kind of
Okay.
responsibility.
What am I at? That must be VII. I don't know. That's like 7. A condenser.
Crochet all day long.
Condenser with an E. Condenser, also called a capacitor. Capacitor, it's the same thing. Is installed in parallel with the points. Points, also called breaker points. Why? Why? Okay, so they're right here. Is this series or parallel with the points? It is in fact parallel. What happens if I put them in series?
Nothing will
It's not going to do anything. It's going to be the stomach.
Doesn't work very well. Fun fact. How does Bendix have them drawn in your manual? Series. How are they actually put in the Magneto? In parallel. I don't know why they did that. Condenser. I'll put this the condenser. Condenser gives an alternate path for electricity to keep the points from arcing. And when they arc, it not only burns up the points, but it also keeps the field from collapsing rapidly because it just keeps ticking away across the points. And that is not a fast collapsing field. That's a very slow one, and that doesn't work well. The process is repeated for each cylinder. All right, so it's worth noting, I think, that in this little drawing right here, it's not drawing this animation. It's not entirely accurate in that what is happening here, and I've got it going about as slow as I think I can go, is there we go.
The contact was open. Or closed.
We got power. Now it's going too slow. I want where the valves open and close are not quite accurate. All right, so right there, all the way down like that, I stopped it at what's called bottom dead center, BDC, and that means that this crankshaft is all the way down. This rod is going straight down, and this cannot go down any further than possible. And as soon as I click it on, you're going to notice, what am I on right here? I think this was the exhaust, coming up on exhaust stroke. Let's see. All right, so the valves open and close at bottom dead center or top dead center in this animation. And they don't necessarily work that way. They open before that, they open after that. I don't want to get into that right now. We'll get that into engines. And also, the spark is going to happen at exactly, that's top dead center, at top dead center. And that does not happen in engines. And the reason why is because you want to get power out of the fuel. And so, oops, bring it up a little more. There you go. So right there's the spark at exactly top dead center. Now, if you were to think it through, you think, well, I mean, that makes sense. You know, it's on top dead center. All that fuel and air is really been smashed in there. That's really tight and it's compressed. And I'm going to light it off, and it's going to explode as soon as and the piston's going to start coming down. So right there, just a little bit more. There it is. And it's going to explode and come down. But it doesn't really work that way. It actually happens before top dead center. Quite a bit before. About, oh, I didn't know I could do that. That's pretty cool. Thought that was just a speed. All right, so here we go. Get it. Exhaust, intake, coming up. It actually happens about 25, 30 degrees before top dead center. And so that right now is when the spark plug is going to go off. And it's going to actually start a flame front as the piston is still coming up. Now you got to think about how fast this is going. There's some inertia involved and the way it works. And we'll explain it more in engines, but I just need you to know right now, the spark actually happens on compression before it gets to the top. And that's how it's going to operate when it runs. Now in cars, that can vary. New cars, it's going to vary a lot with the computer control. In old cars, it still varies. Aircraft, it does not. You have an either or. So if I tried to start an aircraft engine and it was moving very slowly, as it came up, it's coming up real slow because I'm starting it, and boom, spark plug goes off right there. There's not much inertia, and what it's going to tend to want to do is shove the piston back the other way. And that's going to break things, and it will. And so you don't want that. You want it, when you're starting, to fire about right there. And so in an aircraft, we have to find some way to slow, we call it retard the spark and make it later. But once it starts, you want it to go back to 25 degrees before top dead center. In automotive, it's the same thing. So going back to here, the process is repeated. In an automotive, or in this Kettering ignition system, so in this particular one, timing, it's called timing, is when it's going to fire, either early or late or advanced or not. Timing is advanced by the use of flyweights or vacuum advance. In essence, the cam, not the camshaft, but the cam and distributor finger are rotated to fire earlier earlier or later. Let's say earlier or later, depending on what's going on, earlier or later in relation to the camshaft / crank position. So that is to say that I told you in aviation, you set the Magneto to fire. Pretty much it's just, hey, I want you to fire 25 degrees before top dead center. That's what it does. Its whole life. It doesn't know to go one way or the other. It's just kind of the Stephen of the thing. Just man, focused, man. Is that a good one? Focused. You said 25, I'm going 25. That's what I'm going to do my whole life. I'm not changing. Listen, right? Except during start, and then it might. We'll get into that. But this type of system, and I'll go back. It's okay. Because the cam is really, the cam is actually up here. And the breaker points are really located underneath all of this, down in here. there's a plate where all of this sits, and it has flyweights or a little vacuum, and it can twist all on its own, a little bit more advanced or a little bit more retard. And so that allows you to advance the spark, so the spark can happen sooner or later. And that's your vacuum or flyweight advance. What does your little bug have?
Non-vacuum advance. It's
Flyweights.
flyweights.
So it just uses centrifugal force. The faster the engine's going, the more it's going to want to advance itself and advance the spark. And then you slow down and it just comes back around on its own. All right, there we go. Back? Okay. Got mad at me there for a minute. Oh, what is that, page 3? Oh my goodness. All right, and this is something I had mentioned a little bit there. A spark 2 advanced. And by that, I mean 2 advanced. So I said that you want the spark to fire about, especially most aircraft, about 25 degrees before it reaches top dead center. If I did it 2 advanced, meaning 35, 40, 50, 60 degrees before top dead center, it's firing way down here as it's coming up, that's going to cause some bad things. If it's 2 advanced on startup, it's going to kick back. And if you advance it too much during operation, you'll get what's called detonation, or you get pinging. You can hear pinging in your car, right? Okay, well, modern cars have a knock sensor that goes to a computer that tells the electronic ignition to retard a little bit when it starts knocking. What do you have in a Volkswagen? Not picking up Volkswagen today. It's a people's car, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't have any sort of knock sensor.
No.
It just pings like crazy if you're not careful, right?
Yeah. But
So-
you can set it into an advanced timing
Yeah.
as well. So usually that's what a lot of people do is they set it to advanced timing. So
They just manually do it.
manually do it.
Okay, so because the whole thing is timed in a car to the camshaft, you can adjust it, you fine tune it, right? And I don't want to get into that, but it's where you use a timing light and you kind of set it so it's okay. It's at idle. I've got it time. Well, shoot, like my Chevy truck was at 0 degrees.
What year? 'Cause my
88.
73's.
88. But it had electronic. So you unplug something and you set it to 0 and plug it back in. So where do you go with
You
yours
took it
about?
back in
30, I think 32 degrees.
Okay, so 32 degrees. So what does the book call for, you think?
25 to 28 or something.
Okay, so the book says 25 to 28, but you want to go fast. You want to soup it up, so you advance it some. Why? Because it actually, if it fires sooner, you're going to get more pressure, and you're going to use the fuel a little bit better. But there's a drawback to that, and that can cause it's detonation or pinging. And pinging is really, first of all, the fuel doesn't explode. It's a slow burn. It's a push. You've been through this example, right? It's kind of like the difference between, if I want to move this table over there and I get over here and I start pushing on it, all right? The difference between, that's what the fuel's supposed to do. Pinging is where I just use a giant sledgehammer and I just whack it really hard to get it to move, and I just, and just swing it and hit it. So what's that going to do to the table?
Break a little dent.
Yeah, beat the crap out of it. But hey, that's power, right? And that's the drawback, and that's what pinging will get you, is it's like hitting the piston with a sledgehammer versus a nice steady push on it. So that's a bad thing. And, all right, so a Spark 2 advanced at startup will cause kickback. That can damage. It can damage a lot. I put the starter. Put that. Can damage the engine. It also causes detonation, which is also called pinging. We don't call it that in aviation. It's called detonation. Same thing. At higher RPMs. Okay, now in a car, you can hear pinging. So Justin decides he wants to soup up his bug, and so instead of setting it where the factory said, he's going to advance it on his own. You just get out there and you just loosen up the distributor and just kind of turn it in the right direction. Oh yeah, and you get a lot more power out of it. And Now the problem is you have a stick shift, right? And so if you're not in the right gear and you kind of go down to, what do you got, 4-speed, 3-speed?
4.
Yeah, 4-speed. So he goes 4 off of a stoplight. And he's got, low RPM and his foot all the way down. The pressures in the cylinder go way up. You start to hear this pinging, right? So it lugs it, it's pinging away. And, to back off. Well, in aircraft, you can't hear pinging because of the propeller noise. So you just destroy the engine. And it, from everything I've read, 15, 20 seconds of a good pinging will melt out a piston.
What? Only do it for 5.
Yeah, it'll destroy it. So you don't mess around with that. So I guess I tell you that to say when we talk about timing these things, you got to be pretty accurate. If you're not, detonation, and detonation's bad, and people die. So we should probably then go the other way, right? Retard the spark. Just be on the safe side. But a spark too retarded is inefficient. So you don't want that. So.
Okay, children.
People relate to that like that. Let's leave it at that. Yeah, in a minute, he told me that.
Especially at high RPM. And a little bit goes a long way. So you have to be very careful with that. Was it Continental engines? Oh, no, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. They had a problem with the cylinder heads cracking on O200s. And so it was reduced from 28 degrees to 24 degrees. It was 4 degrees, and it stopped the cylinders from exploding off the engine and cracking. And then they made new cylinders and said, okay, if you buy these new cylinders that are better, you can go back to 28. Get your horsepower. All right, so that's what I've got to say about Kettering ignitions. So now we can talk about Magnetos.
These little silly rascals.
Well, this statement's becoming less and less true, but almost all reciprocating engines. Reciprocating engine's a piston engine, not a turbine engine. Reciprocating aircraft. Engines use a magneto system. I say that's becoming less of a truth because there are now, and as I said a minute ago, I'll back up, take a magneto, there's no way to advance the spark. If I set this on the engine to fire at 25 degrees before top dead center, it's what it's going to do. The only way it's going to change is as you get wear into the points. That's it. There's no spark advance, spark retard, nothing. You just get what you get. And that works to a large extent because in an aircraft, engine, unlike a car, where a car you've got 7 different speeds, 8 speeds, 9 speeds, 4 speeds, all these different speeds, all these different RPMs. You're stopping, you're going. In an aircraft, you pretty much have 3 speeds. You've got idle, you've got max RPM, and you've got really about 75 or 70% power where you're going to run most of the time. And also, which is kind of interesting, if you take a car engine and try and run it at 75 to 80% of its power for hours and hours, it's not going to last. But you can take any air, you don't think so?
Well, I do it in my work truck all the time. That broke you.
No, he doesn't. So, which work truck?
This one?
Which one's that?
This one.
And you're running at 70% power?
Matt, do I floor it everywhere I go?
Yes.
Sport truck. He's
That's
not
not-
there.
so anyway, so car engine wouldn't last, but an aircraft engine, you can build it, start it up, run it up to 100% power, leave it there for its whole life. It'll run. They proved it. They run and run. So they'll do that
Until it runs out of gas.
until it runs out of gas.
You say all reciprocating engines.
Almost all. What's that?
Not diesel, diesel.
Hey guys, not diesel.
Not diesel, of course.
Okay, now I got to change that. Almost all gas reciprocating engines. Diesels use something different. They don't. But okay, so what has happened is that's not horribly efficient just to pick a timing. And so there are now companies that, especially the home built world, the guys with these RVs, not motorhomes, but the vans RVs. You guys know what RV, the home builts are?
Yeah.
They're pretty sweet. They're pretty sweet. And I'd say by and large, the people who are building them and flying are pretty bright people. And they do some really neat things because of it. And so what they're doing is they're using, a lot of them were using certified engines. Now they're using different ones. But, you know, they get their Lycomings, Continental mostly Lycomings, and Lycomings are made to run off 2 Magnetos. Well, then you get some smart guy who thinks, you know what, it's an experimental. I don't have to follow the FAA rules and do whatever I want. So they think, I'm just going to take one of these out, throw it away, and I'm going to build some sort of box that senses what's going on and is fully electronic ignition. And so what they do is they'll leave one as just a standard backup, and another one actually uses battery power and electronics, and it's spark advance and retard, and they'll run that. So when they get flying, they'll actually turn off the stupid Magneto and let the smart one do all the work. And then Lycoming kind of got wind of that. Now they make an engine, E2M, something, I forget what it is, E2, which is fully electronic. And so that's going into home builts. And now certified engines, you can do that. You can actually, there's a company where you can take off a Magneto, put electronic ignition on. So electronic ignition is slowly moving its way into aviation. It's expensive, but you can do it. Slick had something for a while with a little bit of the laser ignition. Anyway, but otherwise, almost all Magnetos use the Magneto, or recip engines use the Magneto system. And what am I going to say about that? There are several different types. There are several different types. And now we're going to go back in time to cover it all. So we'll just lump them into basically 2 big groups here. So we have high tension. That's one with the high blood pressure. That is high voltage. High voltage leaves the Magneto and goes to the spark plug. To the spark plug. That comes in 2 different flavors. It comes in the single mag version. Single mag or the dual mag. Now this is confusing because an aircraft engine has 2 Magnetos. Therefore the engine has, and what would you call that? A single mag or a dual mag?
Dual mag.
Dual.
That's 2 single mags. That's not a dual mag. It has dual mags, it's a single mag. But, oh, hang on.
What's a Magneto?
I'm right there with you, bud.
It's an X-Men.
All right. So most engines have, almost all of them, take 2 Magnetos. This is a single drive mag, and it takes 2 of them. So the engine has dual mags, meaning it has one of these and one of those. But it's not a dual mag, they're 2 single mags. Lycoming came up with a thing, and only Lycoming used this, like the A1B6D dual mag drive. This is a dual Magneto. There's one of them. So you have 1 dual Magneto or 2 single Magnetos.
I'd take 2 singles.
So this is what's called a dual Magneto. It's actually, this is for a 4-cylinder engine, and it has 1 drive, and it has,
Yeah, but if you have one thing breaking,
Doesn't that kill the point?
Huh?
Doesn't that just
okay, it has 2 of everything, except, I'll get to that,
the drive man?
2 distributors, 2 breaker points, 2 capacitors, 2 coils, 2 distributors, 2 distributor rotors, 2 of everything except for 1 magnet. Well, what could possibly go wrong with the magnet? Nothing too bad. This is called a D2000. They made it out of magnesium. And what would happen is the magnesium was warping and grabbing on to the distributor rotor not distributor rotor, the magnet, and seizing up the magnet, freezing it back here. So when the magnet freezes up on this, how well does it work?
It doesn't.
So you're gonna get the best fuel economy of your life.
So they came up with a solution. There was an AD that came out and said you can't have these, and so the solution was pretty simple: get rid of it and buy a D3000. So the D3000s are made out of aluminum, and these, by the way, these capacitors, they don't go here; they go in the cap, but they just happen to screw into here conveniently, so it makes a grounding path. You want to put your finger on one of those? All right.
Tim do.
Yeah, let Tim do it.
All right. Well, it's time for a break, and then we'll shock Tim during the break.